Alright guys, so your duramax maybe isn't getting up to temp in the wintertime, you got no heat in the cab, maybe it's overheating when you're towing, temperature's fluctuating, you're having issues with the coolant system like that, and you need to replace your thermostats. Well, this video is for you. Let's get to it. Okay, so tools we'll need is a 3/8 ratchet, 12mm socket, extra extension, long and short, 13mm ratchet wrench, a 13mm wrench, a flat screwdriver, and then some sort of a nut driver with an 8mm socket on it for a hose clamp. Thermostat kit I got is a 9447448 from Cooling Depot. Gives you both thermostats in there with the gaskets. Make sure you got some antifreeze on hand and some paper towel to clean the surfaces. So this truck was having trouble in the wintertime getting up to operating temp, so we're going to do the thermostats in it. We're suspecting one of them is sticking open and keeping the engine too cool, not staying closed long enough for it to warm up. So this truck is a 2007 model. It's a new body style, so it's an LMM engine. This video should be applicable to anything this body style and older. The LML, the newer ones, 2012 and up, actually have a different thermostat housing and different hose routing, but it still is pretty similar overall. First thing we're going to do is get this silencer off the intake here. That's where you're going to use your 5/16 or 8mm socket, loosen the hose clamp, and it pops right off. First thing we're going to do is get the oil fill pipe out of the way. It's got two bolts holding it in, one at the top, one at the bottom. You're going to need your 12mm socket for this. The top one, just put the socket on the ratchet and take it off like so. For the bottom one, you're going to need a couple extensions to reach down in there and get it taken out. And then it's just got an O-ring seal on the bottom. Once you have the bolts out, you can just pull it straight up and it'll lift right out of there. The reason why we'll be taking it out of the way is to gain access to the thermostats once we tilt the thermostat housing up. We're not taking the thermostat housing right off. It's going to save a bunch of time and a bunch of work, and who doesn't like saving time and work? So you just grab that thing, just pull straight up, it'll pop out pretty easy. Once you get out of the truck here, take a look at the bottom where the O-ring is right here. Make sure the O-ring looks good. If it's damaged, now's the time to replace it. Then we're going to remove the rad shroud support bracket here. This is a 13mm head bolt. You want to grab a 13mm ratchet wrench, save yourself some time here. There's 3 bolts in the shroud bracket that go into the thermostat housing. 2 of them are long and then one short one in the back. They're a 12mm head bolt. You'll need a socket, an extension, and a ratchet. You can break those ones loose and pull them out. And then at the very back of the bracket, there's one small wire holder. Use a flat screwdriver to open it up and take it out. And then we'll be able to remove the bracket from on top of the thermostat housing. Now at this point, there's only 4 bolts left holding the thermostats in. 2 on the housing there, and then 2 on this coolant pipe as well that go into the valve cover. To get at one of these coolant pipe bolts though, we need to remove these 2 bail connectors and the 3 bolts that are holding its bracket in place. The bail connector bracket bolts are also a 12mm head, so you're going to need your 12mm socket, a couple extensions as well. 2 of them go straight down from the top. They can be a little bit tricky to get to. They're kind of located just forward and just rearward. You can see in the video of the bail connectors. And just be careful you don't drop the bolts. They're kind of hard to get at. You're probably going to want a magnet here. I was able to get my hands in to fish them out, but make sure you have a magnet on standby just in case. And then one of them kind of goes at an angle on the side. You'll need to use just one of your extensions and kind of put the ratchet in a little bit sideways here. And just be careful of the master cylinder brake pressure sensor there, that you don't accidentally break it or damage it in any way. This nut's in a bit of a tight spot as well, so you might want to grab your magnet to fish it out of there. Once you get it out, we'll get the bail connectors disconnected and we'll be able to slide this bracket out of our way so we can get back to removing that coolant pipe. The bail connectors are pretty straightforward. They got the green locking tab on top there. You slide it back and then you push down on the other tab and then the lever will fold over and unlock the connector. Then they just slide apart and you can take the wires, set them up out of the way here so they're not interfering with getting the bracket moved over. And then we'll be able to get at that coolant pipe bolt. Then you can grab your 12mm socket again and a couple extensions. And if you just kind of push the bracket over, then you'll be able to access that bolt on the side of the coolant pipe. It goes straight down into the valve cover. There's one behind here, and then there's also one in front. So 2 of them at the end here. Get them spun out of there. That'll get that pipe loose on the end. And then we'll go back over to the thermostat housing and take the last 2 bolts out of it. You're going to want to be careful with this hose coming off the back of the coolant pipe. It goes into the turbo and provides coolant to it. Just be careful you don't kink it off or wreck it. Make sure you take a good look at it when we're filling the coolant back up and make sure it hasn't been damaged in any way. Then we're going to take our oil fill tube and pop it back into place. That way any antifreeze that runs out isn't going to go into the motor and into your oil.
Then you want to go ahead and grab that 12mm socket and put it on the end of the ratchet again, and we'll just finish taking out all the thermostat housing bolts. There should be 2 left in there. The first 2 we already took out, they're attached to that bracket. Once you get those 2 thermostat housing bolts out, then we're going to lift the thermostat housing up. So make sure you have a drain pan underneath the truck, that way you can catch into the antifreeze that's going to drain out of there. It's not going to be a whole lot, basically just whatever's just above the thermostat and in that top rad hose. With the housing loose and the antifreeze in that top part there drained out, we're going to remove the oil fill tube once again. Then take some rags in there and plug off the hole so you don't get any debris or anything else falling in there. Then we can go ahead and prop up our thermostat housing. You want to kind of lift it up here just a little bit, and you can kind of set it against the AC compressor here to hold it up out of your way. And then you'll see we have lots of room to get our hands in here, and we'll pop the 2 thermostats out. Now you're going to want to make sure you pay attention to which way the thermostats are orientated. The one at the back is offset a little, and you're going to want to make sure that goes in the exact same way, otherwise you're going to have issues. The front and the rear thermostat are different thermostats, so make sure they do go in the right way. And when you're at the parts store, make sure if they do sell you 2 individual thermostats, make sure they're the correct ones, or just get that double kit that I bought. I had a little bit of antifreeze come out once I popped the thermostats out of there, so I'm just going to swap out the rag that's in the oil fill tube hole just to get a fresh dry one in there. Then we're going to take some more of these paper shop towels and clean the surfaces off on the bottom of the housing and also on the top of the Y bridge that the thermostats go into. Once we get those cleaned up, we'll grab our 2 new thermostats. Again, make sure you have them in the correct order and in the correct orientation. There will be instructions in the box that show you which way they go. Just have a look at that, get it lined up with the way the truck is, and put them both into the right positions. The thermostat should set in nicely just with hand pressure. Make sure you don't pinch the O-rings or fold the O-rings over, and that they are flush when you put the thermostat housing back on. You might need to grab the pipe here and give it a little bit of a wiggle to get it in place. But once it's lined up, you can get your bolts back in. Now remember, the 2 center bolts go in with the bracket, so we'll just start off with the very front bolt and the very rear bolt. We'll get them snugged up by hand. You're going to want to wind them down by hand here and start to tighten them. Make sure it doesn't feel weird, doesn't feel squishy, because if it feels squishy, then likely you have an O-ring that's out of place or a thermostat that's out of place, and you're starting to pinch that. And if you're tightening it too much, you're going to crack or wreck the housing. So if everything feels good and it starts to tighten up and it gets real solid real quick, then you can give it a good snug turn. I think the torque spec for these is about 22 foot-pounds. With the thermostat housing back in place, everything else is going to start going back together here, and it's basically the opposite of the way we took it all apart. So we'll get our 2 bolts in for the thermostat housing pipe that goes over to the top rad hose. Get those 2 bolts started by hand and then put them in with the ratchet and tighten them up. Again, 22 foot-pounds is a spec for most of this stuff. Then we'll slide back over to the thermostat housing and get the bracket back installed on top of it. There's 3 bolts to hold it in place. 1 short one and 2 longer ones. Get the 2 longer ones in, and then there's 1 short one. Then you're going to want to torque down the 2 long ones along with the other 2 thermostat housing bolts to 22 foot-pounds in a nice cross even pattern, starting at the 2 center ones and then the 2 outside ones. Next, we'll grab our oil fill pipe one more time and finally install it for the final time, I promise. Remember, there's no ring on the bottom. You can lube it up or use a little bit of silicone if you want. Then there's 1 bolt near the top of it and 1 bolt at the bottom of it for the flange. Put those 2 in and tighten them up to 22 foot-pounds as well. Then we'll move back over to our 2 bail connectors here, the 2 main electrical wire connectors for the engine harness. Remember, there's 2 bolts going straight up and down into the valve cover there, and then we have that 1 down lower that goes in at an angle. So put those 3 bolts in and get them tightened up. And then we'll get our 2 electrical connectors plugged back in, slide the locking tabs over to lock them in place, and then slide the little green tabs over to lock the blue locking tabs in place. Then we can snap our wire back into this little wire holder here on top of the thermostat housing. Then I always like to check this wire here that goes to the turbocharger, make sure it didn't get pinched in any way and it still moves freely. Then go ahead and grab your air silencer, pop it back onto the intake pipe, into the front holder that goes to the thermostat housing as well, and then grab your 8mm socket and tighten the clamp up to finish off its install.
Probably take a little more antifreeze than that, but I'm going to run it for a bit, let it warm up, get up to a full heat cycle, let the thermostats open, burp the air out of the system, then I'll shut it off, let it cool down. Double check the antifreeze, top it up from there. Might want to take a minute to wash the belt off, a little soapy water, rinse it with some water, but I think it'll be alright. a look for leaks there. Make sure you don't see any coolant coming out at all. Here as well. Then you want to make sure you take a look down there back at that hose that we didn't remove. Make sure you didn't pinch it.
Just going to jump right in for a second here. I forgot to mention, right here on top of the thermostat housing, there's a small screw. You can take that out to help bleed the air to the system. I usually don't use it. I usually don't need to, but if you're having trouble getting the system to bleed the air out, just take that screw out. It's a 12 millimeter socket as well. You can unscrew it, just loosen it. The air will come out. Some antifreeze will bubble out of there. Tighten it back up and you'll be good to go.
Offers to do something weird with it, make sure it's not leaking. But if you took your time and did everything nice, it should be 100%. Alright, so that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you want to do that as well, and we'll see you in the next video.